Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio for this special show looking at eco-educators shaping the future. And we are going to be discussing, well, a lot of things: climate education, particularly this evening, youth-led initiatives, sustainability in schools. And this entire show this evening is brought to you in collaboration with SOS UK. We'll find out more about them in just a moment and their Teach the Teacher campaign. Now, just as a little introduction to them, before I hand and introduce my amazing co-host Harry and our incredible guest Sachin, before that, I just want to play you a short video because I think it's fantastic, just to give us a little bit of an overview about what we might be discussing this evening.
95% of young people aged 4 to 18 are worried about the planet's future due to climate change. Climate change will affect us all, but we can also be part of the solution. Young people often struggle to see how they fit into climate action, and that's where Teach the Teacher comes in. Teach the Teacher is a campaign by students organising for Sustainability UK, which champions climate education being integrated across all school subjects, so students can see how they can act on climate change. We provide free training and resources for students to deliver a 1-hour climate workshop for their teachers. The workshop covers climate basics, climate justice, climate anxiety, climate education, understanding the importance of climate education for all and how to integrate it into every subject. Taking part in Teach the Teacher is easy, with only 5 steps to follow. Step 1, sign up on our website and a team member will contact you. Step 2, we'll onboard your students and build their confidence in discussing climate change. Step 3, we'll provide all the resources and you can rehearse and set a date. Step 4, deliver the workshop. Step 5, teachers can pledge to include climate topics in their lessons and access our resource library. Participating helps students gain green skills and become change makers in their schools. For more information or to sign up, visit greenschoolsrevolution.org or email hello@teachtheteacher.uk.
Amazing stuff. Listen, right, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'll introduce my co-host tonight, who's a special guest co-host, zooming in all the way from the beautiful Seville in Spain, is the wonderful Harry Waters. How are you this evening, Harry?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be back in the Teachers Talk Radio studio, comfortable as ever.
And we were just discussing, actually, before we came on air, your most recent, because if you don't know who Harry is a teacher, a blogger, a thinker, but above all else, he is somebody who cares deeply about climate and climate change and climate activism. And we were just talking before we came on air about Harry's most recent project. Do you want to tell people what that is? Because it's very fascinating.
Well, at the moment, as it is November, I've decided that every day I'm going to pick up as many cigarette butts as possible. So, we've made the obvious pun of November butt. And then we're using as many puns as I can, really, telling people to pick their butt and, all of those different things. And at the moment, so far, since November started, just 11 days ago, we're at around 9,500-ish. I could tell you the exact one, but I'd have to turn around, and nobody wants to see the back of my head.
I'm genuinely impressed, but I think that gives you a little insight into my amazing co-host and why he is a co-host on this show. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our special guest this evening, which is Sachin Bopal-Myers. Now, Sachin, you are a second-year student at the London School of Economics. You have been involved in climate action since the age of 16. Now, I'm going to sort of let you briefly tell us maybe a little bit more about you just before I hand over to Harry, with obviously so we can get into the detail of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So do you want to tell everybody who you are firstly?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. My name is Sachin Bopal-Myers. I work for SOS UK as a campaign coordinator on the Teach the Teacher campaign, hence why I'm here tonight. But as well, I've done lots of different activist work, everything from refugee rights to sustainability, to racial justice and so on. So really excited to be on here tonight and to be chatting more about shaping the future.
Brilliant. Amazing. Right, well, we've got so much to discuss, haven't we? Harry, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, why not?
You don't have to. I mean, I can, but I think you should. Because you're the man.
Yeah. I absolutely love what's going on with SOS UK, and I love this Teach the Teacher mission. It's so in tune with everything I do, and I absolutely love it. But our listeners, our viewers might not know all that much about SOS UK. So if you could first tell us a little bit about SOS UK, then the mission, and then how the Green Schools Revolution program started. So I'm starting you off with 3 questions in one.
I like it. It's a challenge. Perfect. So SOS UK, or Students Organising for Sustainability UK, which is a mouthful, hence why we're SOS UK, is a national environmental education charity. And we work towards improving sustainability, climate justice, and education for students. So our sort of mission, we have sort of 3 main aims which we work towards. So the first aim is to get more students leading on and learning for sustainability. The second aim is to help create an education system that's repurposed around the climate emergency and the ecological crisis. And thirdly, our third aim or mission is to help make the sustainability sector more inclusive so that everyone can be involved. And then where I come into it is I work in the GSR, or Green Schools Revolution program. So Green Schools Revolution project was launched in January of 2023. It's a 3-year project aimed at creating high quality, meaningful opportunities for young people. So specifically in secondary schools, but we're now working as well in primary schools and with PGCE groups and colleges and sixth form as well, to essentially green their schools and to get students to take lead on issues of sustainability and climate justice within education. So we're also building on the work and the aims of the Department for Education's climate sustainability strategy. So GSR, or Green Schools Revolution, is funded by the OVO Foundation and the I Will Fund. And we have 4 key strands. So the first strand we have is the climate action plans. So this is where we help schools to create youth-led climate action plans as required by the climate and sustainability strategy. So there isn't much guidance on what CAPs look like, which means there's also lots of freedom for schools to make really individual climate action plans, or CAPs. The next thread we have is wilding. So this is helping schools and young people to take the youth-led approach to rewilding at least 30% of their campuses, which is also as required by the climate and sustainability strategy.
Can I just cut in there? What is that? Sorry, rewilding, was it?
Rewilding.
So
rewilding.
Sorry, my pronunciation might have been a bit off.
No, that's okay.
Sure. So then the next thread we have is the Futures Forum. So this is helping link young people to environmental organizations to empower youth voice in the sustainability sector. And lastly, which is where I work, is on Teach the Teacher. So we support and empower young people to deliver a climate education workshop with their teachers, helping them to understand the easy but impactful ways that climate can be integrated into the classroom across all subjects. So this is to avoid the siloing of climate into just being seen as maybe like a science problem or a geography problem. So essentially opening up climate education to all students so they can understand how they can be part of the solution, no matter what subjects they're passionate about, what careers they're interested in, or just where they see themselves in the future.
It's almost like you've reached into my brain and just taken out everything that I think that education really needs. So you've just gone in there. And what I love as well is that the organization is full of what I like to call TLAs, which are 3-letter abbreviations. You know, you can't get anywhere in teaching if you don't have loads and loads and loads of TLAs. They're vital. They're vital to it. So you talked a little bit about how Teach the Teacher works, but how does it fit into the Green Schools Revolution, and what are the nuts and bolts to it?
Sure. So Teach the Teacher, or TTT for your TLA, there you go. It fits into the Green Schools Revolution project through creating opportunities for young people to essentially take leadership on their school experience, So it offers young people all the way up from primary school age to colleges, and now more recently PGC programs as well. Offers students the chance for them to learn green skills and to work with their teachers in a collaborative way to create more climate inclusive lessons. So although like climate action plans and Wilding address sustainability on an organizational level, here at Teach the Teacher, we address sustainability at the more curriculum level. So it's good to have like the whole school approach. And so we're student led, and it's a really great program for everyone to like learn about empowerment, leadership, how they can be agents of change, and those green skills, and also like literacy skills, oracy skills. There's so much which our program encompasses. So we offer teachers the chance to hear from their students about why climate justice is so important and how climate can be included within lesson plans. So everyone benefits, both the teachers learning more about those environmental challenges, but also young people in learning those vital green skills. And so then sort of like how it all works, and like I said, the nuts and bolts of it, it's quite an easy process. So firstly, like schools just register online. They can simply send an email, or there's a form you can fill out online. Really easy to get involved with. And then we run our like 1 hour onboarding session. So this is like, in my opinion, like weirdly, it's like my favorite part of it, because it's a really great opportunity to like build that enthusiasm and excitement around it. So essentially, this is a 1 hour training program where we get the students up to speed with all the different content of the session, but also find out more about why the students are passionate and care so much about climate justice. And this is something we offer in person or online, so we're really flexible around what we can do. So after that, we send the resources, which are like a ready-made presentation and script, to the schools, so then students can start rehearsing, really getting into it. And what I really like about the resources, they're really adaptable. So in particular for students who might have some really unique ideas or something which maybe it's a case study which they're really passionate about, it can easily be taken in. We always say that we have these case studies within it, but you can get rid of them and change them. So it's really collaborative and really gives the students a chance to lead on the project. We also have a really great micro grant of up to £100 to support the workshops or like a eco or climate-based initiative in their school. So then the most exciting bit is the 1 hour workshop with the teachers. So that's where the students start delivering the session. We basically get to flip the roles. So the students become the teachers become the students. We have some students tell off their teachers when they're not listening or something like that, which is really fun. Makes it like a really good, exciting way of getting that participation from everyone. So our workshop covers 4 different areas, which is climate basics. So the first area is climate basics. So you don't need to be an expert to talk about climate change, but arguably there's a lot of things which are really important you need to know. So we have all it like condensed into one nice section. After that, we explore who is responsible for climate change by looking at climate justice. So who is most vulnerable, who is going to be most at risk of climate change, and so on. And the next thing we look at is climate anxiety, especially within young people today. This is like very prevalent and very important. So getting young people to talk to their teachers about what it's like growing up in a world where climate change is real and it's happening now. And lastly, we have climate education, which is the kind of the best bit. It's the open discussion where young people and their teachers can have this open collaboration, coming up with ideas about how climate change can be introduced into all subjects in school, no matter what you're teaching. So then once the session's done, we sometimes have, like with the micro grant, students will maybe have prizes for the most engaged student or teacher, depending on how you look at it, and so on. And then teachers have an opportunity to make a climate education pledge. So this means that if they make the pledge, they'll have access to our huge array of resources, everything from activities, videos, lesson plans, which they can easily use to integrate climate into their lessons going forwards.
Can I just butt in? I actually read somewhere on YouGov that one of the reasons, it's not like in the top 3 or 5, but it's in the top, like, say 15, that people don't want to have children is because of climate anxiety. It was something like, it was maybe 6 or 7% of people who said they didn't want children that was a key reason. So it is obviously a big issue, isn't it? Which is why I'm presuming it's in this workshop.
No, exactly. We really place that importance because it also opens up that discussion with the students. I think sometimes it's really difficult for young people to talk about their mental health and to talk about, the things they're worrying about. And unfortunately, it's the case that climate change is real and we can see it, and we see it in the media. And also through that, even like just strategies of cope so that students can like look at positive news stories rather than things saying the world's going to burn or something like that.
Yeah, and taking action and taking steps to move that anxiety into agency. I was trying to find my favorite thing about everything you said that was in there, and it's really difficult because there are so many different things that I want to pick out. But one of the things you said early on is about the flexibility of it, because not everybody has the same reason for being interested in the climate crisis, in climate justice. There are so many different reasons for someone to want to get involved. So having that flexibility within the training sessions is super important, because there's no use just sending out, I don't know, single-use plastics. Everybody has to talk about that because it affects everyone. Yes, it does, but not everybody really cares. I'm sorry, I wish they did, but they don't. So it's so important to have that flexibility. So the students who are interested for the reason that they are interested, not for the reasons that we tell them they should be interested. Even though as teachers, they should definitely be interested in everything we say, because we know everything. We don't, by the way. So we're going to talk a little bit about your personal journey. Tom, would you like to give the lead in for that one?
Oh, sure. Well, I was intrigued when it said that you started all this when you were 16. So, I want to know, really, before the stuff about SOS UK and the Teach the Teacher campaign, I want to know why you personally have got fired up about climate change. Like, where did that all start from? Because you're still obviously young now.
That's a good question. I think for me, it's seeing those stories in the media, seeing those impacts that it has, and also and I'll go on to speak later as well about it, but the intersections within climate justice. And I think that's always something which gets overlooked. My original reasons for getting into activism is that I'm a non-white person, and so the amount of racism I experienced, especially growing up in a very predominantly white area where that was a big problem, it's something which really drove me. But as well as seeing the impacts of climate justice on other people of color, it kind of resonates with me quite a bit. So I think that's the main reason why I got involved. And as well, just seeing, it's just those news stories. I think you can't miss them when you see them and you're so angry by how our world is being treated. There's that classic phrase, we don't have a planet B, but it's true. We need to take care of our environment. I think that's the main reason why I'm so involved as I am now.
So go on, tell us then. That makes perfect sense. Tell us then how that then led on then to you getting involved with SOS UK, the Teach the Teacher campaign. How did you get involved with that?
Sure.
I should mention as well. I saw in your bio that you won the 2024 Activist of the Year award.
Yeah, that was from my student union. That was a real privilege to get that.
I'm guessing that's a relatively big deal, in the sense that I'm sure there's a lot of students doing a lot of things, I would imagine, in the activism area. Because surely that's just what students do, isn't it? Everybody at that age is trying to do something.
I'll say, especially in light of recent activism on campus, I was shocked to get nominated, and I was asking my friends who nominated me, who did this, but also just to then win it was really quite something. I was really I was very taken aback, and to be honest, I'm probably still taken aback now, because I'm just whenever it gets mentioned, I'm yeah, damn, that was quite crazy.
Yeah, that's really cool. So go on. How did you get involved with SOS UK then, Teach the Teacher campaign from there?
Sure. So it's quite an interesting journey, actually, because I don't have sort of a typical climate justice activist story. So for example, I've not been on XR rallies typically. I've not been blocking buses or something like that. And so
what do you think of that, Sachin? What do you think of those ones? The big ones, the I don't know, splashing the Mona Lisa and the ones in the motorways. Obviously, they've proven very controversial. I wondered sort of what your take on that was, if you've got one.
I think in terms of those protests, I think everyone has a right to protest, to start with. And I think that for me, it's not something I would do, in partly because of my ethnicity, which would make it much more likely susceptible to like police violence and so on. Hence why I haven't done that in the past. But as well, I think that if it makes change and there's no like damaging impact, then like it makes sense in the sense that like those suits being thrown at the Mona Lisa were planned so that the Mona Lisa wouldn't get damaged, for example, and so on. And I think they're more about bringing that attention to the media. And you can see it works because we're still talking about it now, even though it happened a long time ago. You see it in the media. It took international attention. So I think it's how you define protests and how you do it. But I'm not necessarily opposed to it because I think if it brings attention to it and it's for the right reasons, it makes sense,
Well,
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
I have to cut in. Go on, Harry.
Sorry.
Go on.
I was going to say, I think one of my favourite quotes that's related to this is "Women didn't get the vote by voting,"
Exactly.
and to me, it kind of that resonates pretty well with the campaign. Again, I wouldn't go and block a motorway, but that's because I'm going to admit it. I'd be scared of being sent to prison, and I don't think I'd do very well in prison. I wish I did dare, but I probably wouldn't. So my activism tends to be less direct.
Well, yeah, I mean, it brings me back to I'm obviously an Everton fan, and one of the fans got on the pitch and attached himself to the goalpost during a game, and it actually created a very popular Everton fan meme where that was almost relief for us. That the game was essentially paused for an hour so they could unchain this guy from the post. And then there's plenty of memes out there. There's a guy trying to cut him off like this with pliers. So, yeah, I mean, go on then. SOS campaign, Teach the Teacher. So we're going to get there eventually, Sachin. We keep going off on these mega tangents, which are very, very interesting. And it's me being very selfish about questions I want to ask you. But tell us about that.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I've been working at SOS now since February this year. So next February will be my year anniversary working there, which is kind of mad that it's now coming up to that, I suppose. And I started off as a campaign coordinator, and that's a role which I've kind of just carried through up until now, which I really enjoy. I think in terms of like working for SOS, it's great to work there, firstly, because it's a paid opportunity. Like I'm paid to work in the charity sector. As someone who's 19 years old, that's very rare. Like when I say it to my friends, like always quite taken aback. So I think part of that is really like important to me that it's a job for me, and like it's something I can make an impact, but also like support myself through that. And previously to SOS UK, I worked with Citizens UK on a sustainability campaign. So this was focused around like bettering public transport for young people, specifically to make it more affordable and also to make sustainable travel more affordable. Mm-hmm. And it's something which taught me so many skills. I think I was there in the end for like a year and a half. So I was volunteering there for a really long time, saw the campaign basically from start to finish. And it taught me those really important skills about like community organizing and how you can build campaigns, build power to be able to make an impact. And I think as well, because I didn't come from, I suppose, that typical climate background, it was a really interesting way of getting into the sector. I also worked on the racial action for the climate emergency report this summer, doing some resource development, which is really interesting and giving me some like really valuable insight into the underrepresentation within the sector. I mean, we all know it's a massive problem, but I think when you work in it and you see the statistics, you're like, well, this is a huge problem. And yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, and it's also led me on to other things, because within that, I also do work outside of climate justice organising and working towards that. So really nice way to be able to work in this space and then use those skills for other like work I do.
And so with your background in humanitarian work and your passion for social justice, would you say that there are parallels between advocating for refugee rights and for climate action? And then how did these intersect in terms of climate and racial justice? Yeah,
sure. So in terms of humanitarian work I'm doing, as I was telling you guys earlier, I volunteer in Calais in northern France. So for those who aren't aware, I will give some context that essentially when people are on the move, there's like limited safe routes for refugees to take. It can force people into small boats. And so I've worked in that area of essentially giving out like vital humanitarian aid and so on. And it's really like made me realize just how big of an impact the climate is having on the rights of refugees and so on. I mean, at the moment, the UNHCR, which is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, estimates that there are 43.4 million refugees globally. And it's also expected that there could be up to 1.2 billion refugees by 2050. You know, that's a huge number of people, and fleeing because of climate change is huge. And I think it really follows along those lines of racial and climate justice, because essentially the people who are fleeing their countries are typically people of color and people from the global south, where essentially our impact as a global northwestern country of emitting significant amounts of CO2 and fossil fuels and so on is creating those problems. It's creating, having people having to leave their homes. I was in Calais just last week, and I spoke to someone from Pakistan who was telling me that part of the reason why I had to leave was because of the floods. And it really like dials in that these are such intersecting factors, and it's only when like we take action and we actually stand up both for the rights of refugees and for the rights of the climate is when we can make that difference. I mean, looking at it as well in terms of like the parallels between war and climate justice and how like the global north can have significant influence on those things. It really hones in on the idea that there's such intersectionality between that. And it's also why we can't look at things within a vacuum or within isolation. You know, like looking at, I think when I read Kimberly Crenshaw about it and reading intersectionality, that was quite like a eye-opening moment for me, because I was able to understand about why different things can have similar impacts and so on, and how those intersecting identities are really important to look at, not just in isolation, but as a whole object.
It is so true. And in terms of when you look even at the climate crisis as a whole, you cannot just look at one thing. Obviously, you cannot work on everything. You can't say, I'm going to try and solve it. Maybe you look at those individual areas that you can focus on, but understanding the whole is super important. But looking ahead, this work that you're doing with TTT, or Teach to Teacher, has it influenced your own education and your desired career path? Or are you still going the way you thought you would when you started?
Oh, it's definitely influenced my career path and what I'm interested in. I think it's interesting because I had already like started my degree, and I think it was 5 months in when I started or 4 months in at Teach to Teacher. But definitely looking into the future, things around like sustainability and stuff is something I'm definitely gonna look into. And as well, like we were just saying about like intersectionality alone, that even within like subjects, you know, at like master's level or so on, like when looking at stuff like urban development, it's got so many parallels between those two things. But working on Teach to Teacher has really like fueled my interest in working in the charity sector. I think I always had a idea that was sort of the direction I wanted to go, whether that's in like climate justice organizing or maybe like migrants' rights organizing or so on. It's always been something I've been interested in, but now seeing how like working in a charity has so many positive impacts. Like you can make a difference and, you know, support yourself and so on through that. It's something which just really allowed me to just see that positive action in practice. And I think as well, like working in with TTT or teacher teacher, the like personal development opportunities I've had have been huge. You know, I was a panelist on New York Climate Week just a few weeks ago.
Wow.
And that was a really great opportunity just to see the different, you know, we had lots of different panelists talking about approaches to like climate organizing, and to see so many different backgrounds, so many different people from the different areas of the sector, all with different stories of why they've ended up in those jobs and so on, really motivates me that it's something I can achieve and something I can go forward to do. And I think it's as well particularly important that now, as like, you know, any job can be a green job. So how can we influence that and create that space so that all jobs can work towards that?
Can I butt in again with one of my amazing sort of loads of people say this and it's really controversial type points. So there'll be many listening to this, and I'll put this to both of you actually. I'll put it to Sachin and Harry. There'll be some watching this going, that's all well and good, but you know, countries like China and India and maybe Brazil and other countries that are almost, you know, on that development journey are doing so much that you know, and this is not me saying this, by the way, because I actually personally think everyone should do what everyone can do, right? However, there'll be people going, there is no point because of those huge emissions that are happening in one part of the world and then not. So that was more my question to you, Sachin. When you were talking about the global north, what did that mean? And you know, and how would you respond to those people who would say, they wouldn't say it's pointless, but they challenge to say, well, what is the actual impact of it?
Well, I'd firstly say to those people that if you look at like per capita emissions, i.e. the individual versus like GDP or something like that, or a country's total output, you can also see that it is still the global north countries which emit the most. So like it's very important as well to recognize that when countries are going through development, it's part of that process of greening that development. But I would say that like alone, like looking at per capita emissions is really important because it contextualizes it and it makes you realize that actually there's like 1.2 billion people in India alone. You know, like there's a lot of people. Don't quote me on that statistic. I know it's roughly that, but there's a lot of people, and as well that, you know, if you look at colonial histories and so on, it's what creates these problems around both countries having their ability to develop on their own and so on. So I would say that, but as well that everyone has to try and do something, and if we don't do that, then we would just reach breaking point way earlier. So it's also about how you approach it from a mindset that, sure, some people aren't going to care about it. That's the same with every single cause ever. Like there will be no cause in the world which everyone cares about, because it's not, you know, it just doesn't make sense. So I think approaching the idea that the majority of people do care about the climate, and that I would also argue that those people making those arguments maybe are the loudest voices, but not representative of the overall voice.
I think also, like when it comes to China being, you know, huge producers of CO2 emissions, who are they producing the emissions for? Like, where are these factories? Where are these things being sent to? Who is, you know, sending their work to China to create such huge amounts of stuff? And often it is the global north that are looking for the cheapest place to make their profit, because it's just cheaper to send it to China, and then the emissions are all plonked onto China rather than, you know, the headquarters of the company that it comes from. Like if you look at China's advances in renewable energy, for example, they're way ahead. They're way ahead. I'm going to swing back away from developing countries and to youth-led climate action. Just over half a decade ago, I don't know if you remember, a young lady named Greta. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of her. Quite a famous youth activist. she dominated the headlines and continues to do so with her strikes for the climate, and so much so that almost every youth activist that there is now, including my daughter, everybody says, "Oh, you're the next Greta," or you're going to save the world or you're the next Greta. So either all of the pressure you can possibly put on somebody, or comparing them to somebody else. There's never going to be a next Messi. There's never going to be a next Greta.
I want to be the next Harry Waters. That's always been what I've wanted.
That's it. Well, we're getting there with the beard. So I was wondering what you thought. How much of an impact has Greta's movement and Fridays for Future had on young people, and what role do the student campaigns play in pushing for systematic change in schools?
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of like Fridays for Future and school, that's a mouthful, school strikes for climate, I think it's actually been really paramount to opening up, particularly like the youth and young people, to like climate justice organizing. I mean, alone, it's really emphasized the importance of like how climate change is real and how our generations and future generations beyond me will be the most affected people. And I think the main thing about Fridays for Future was that it was the first big climate movement of young people, at least that I can remember, where it mobilized so many young people to take action on climate change and created this community that the young people were going to try and fix climate change. They're going to try and achieve climate justice. I think it also let young people know that they can be involved in climate activism. I mean, prior to this, there was like XR was around a similar time, Greenpeace, but they didn't seem very accessible to young people, and particularly like as low as primary school students. Everyone was getting really involved with it, and I think it was that big sense of community which first brought it together. But also, Greta brought climate to the world stage. She showed everyone just how both important and powerful young people are. I think young people are doubted by their ability on so many times, so many occasions, but young people now have this role model who can show that you actually can make a difference. You can stand up and fight for what you believe in. And I think as well alone that she showed that neurodiverse people can be leaders within the climate space. And again, this is something we hadn't seen before. And so it gave people a leader. And, like students also don't realize that they have power within schools. It's certainly more difficult to see the impact of student voice in schools because all schools are so different and so unique in how they run, how they operate, and so on. But if you look just slightly ahead to university, you can see those campaigns, such as student-led campaigns in universities who've led to their universities divesting from fossil fuels or changing to more plant-based food options in outlets and so on, or supporting fairer pay for workers. And these are all climate justice related issues. And I think if young people in schools know who to speak to, they can also like get things done. So like joining your eco committee, working with your school council, and just like listening to your students, working together collectively. I think we've seen through this movement, schools have been able to make changes. I mean, we've heard testimonies from bringing water fountains into schools, more water fountains, increasing plant-based options, and even engaging in climate education. And it also brings me back to what I spoke about earlier about the transport campaign I worked on, as by having a community organizer and someone who was able to help us through the process, I was able to lead on a project I cared about and a project focused on sustainability and making positive impact. And I think part of that, the reason why I was able to do that is because by having Fridays for Future and School Strikes for Climate as a mainstream international movement, it brought those issues to the center stage, which later down the line, like maybe probably would have been about 2 or 3 years later at the time, but enabled me to have that opportunity to do that.
Well, we're going to talk a bit about youth-led initiatives. Now, what you were saying then really takes me back to, I was working in the school back in 2016, so pre-Greta. And I remember this was the time when I really saw the power of the student voice. It was a private school, which did absolutely nothing for the climate. So much so that on Earth Day, they printed out a whole bunch of pictures for the students to colour in to say Happy Earth Day. There were no recycling, there was absolutely nothing. There were plastic cups in the teachers' room, and I'd speak to the teachers saying maybe they should bring their own bottle, and just got called Captain Planet, and there you go. And so with my 5th grade students, we wrote letters campaigning that every classroom should have recycling bins in them, and there should be a recycling campaign. Now, we know that recycling isn't the answer, obviously, but in a school that has absolutely nothing, it was very much a first step. And it worked, and these letters worked that all of the students wrote to the parents, to the teachers, and to the directors of the school. So it made a huge difference. So I wonder, why do you think that these youth-led initiatives like Teach the Teacher are particularly important in addressing the climate crisis within schools?
I think it's exactly what you're saying about that youth power. I mean, like with Teach the Teacher, it's that ability for it to be a youth-led project. And I think that's what makes it so pivotal for young people, to give them the opportunity to make an impact within their schools and ultimately for their classmates. It's about making those impacts which actually are visible, and you can see that within your friends or your social groups or so on. I think in particular about Teach the Teacher, I really value how it's a collaborative model. It's a collaborative working technique. Like, sure, I support those schools in running them, but I don't go and deliver the teacher session. The students do. I just help them through the onboarding and the more like admin bits, for example. And I think it just demonstrates why climate education is so important to young people's education, because it just makes it so clear. Because when you have a teacher running when you have a student running a presentation to a teacher, it gives a lot more authenticity and a lot more just genuine vibe about it, because it's the students actually saying, look, this is what we really care about, and this is what we want to work with you. Because that's the other thing, is that it's not a protest. It's not something where there's any form of aggression or anything. It's a presentation, where they're saying, look, we want to work with you. This is what we can offer, but also let's work together. What ideas do you have? And I think as well, that comes on nicely to the benefits that it has for teachers, because not only is it an opportunity for development in their own field. I mean, we see teachers from all different backgrounds, everything from stuff like hair and beauty to maths teachers. And it gives them an understanding of maybe what barriers students face within the climate crisis, but also how can they help. And I think as well, we've got to recognize that schools are under so much pressure. Like, look at funding, capacity of staff, expectations of assessments. It's so difficult to know how to engage in the extracurricular, and in particular a topic like climate change. I mean, climate change is a huge, huge topic. It's something which, you can't just dip in and out of it. It's something which is always present. It's only going to get worse. So it's important that students who are receiving that climate education are able to lead on the climate crisis, because it gives teachers that opportunity to work together. And, teachers want to support their students, and they will take their lead seriously. I mean, I've been in those sessions and seen teachers really engage, and it's really nice to see that teachers are so aware of what the crisis students are facing, but also how they can then help those students.
Yeah, it's almost, what do you want to learn? What do you want to work on as well? So as you say, can we work on it together? It's not the students coming in saying, I know more than you do, so I'm teaching you. It's them coming in saying, look, we know this much, and we know that we can probably get it in all of these other lessons in these other areas. So can you help us and do that as well? But yeah, as you say, there is an awful lot of pressure on teachers. And so having the students there literally almost begging them for it, but asking them to do it is super important. And I was wondering if you could just share some an example or a story or an anecdote of where you've seen Teach the Teacher making a tangible difference in a school.
Yeah, sure. I think the example which always comes to mind for me is South Lanarkshire Council in Scotland. So this goes all the way back to 2023 when we ran Teach the Teacher with 7 different schools in the council district, which reached 180 teachers. So we had such a positive response from the students and the teachers with so many climate education pledges. And the education department at South Lanarkshire Council were both shocked and impressed at the reach we were able to get. So in 2024, they actually mandated Teach the Teacher for all of the secondary schools within their district. Now, in 2024, I believe it was about 2 months ago, maybe last month, we ran an in-person onboarding with 16 schools. So lots of student leaders all came together in South Lanarkshire in person. We get engaged with over 100 students on climate change and the different aspects of our program. And the students were incredibly engaged. I mean, they came up with so many great ideas. 2 of my colleagues went along to deliver the onboarding, and they came back just being like, wow, this was amazing. We had so many unique ideas and lots of ideas we hadn't heard of before, which is really refreshing to hear, especially we run lots and lots of onboardings. So we're quite used to the same ideas, but there was some very much out of the box thinking going on, which was great. So the council collected those ideas and is sharing them all around the schools so that the best practice can already be shared. But also what I think where this leads on to is actually today in South Lanarkshire is a district-wide inset day. So today, all the students, all those 100 plus students went to their schools on their day off, which I think alone is really powerful, but delivered their teacher sessions to their students. So that's where that mandating from the council has come through today. And we're really excited to hear how these sessions go. I mean, we're already supporting the council to get the teacher running in their primary schools, in colleges, and even within local PGCE providers. But just that it happened today alone was a great coincidence for the radio interview. But we're really excited to hear where it goes. But it's just a true success story that by working with the council, with the teachers, and with all these different stakeholders together in a big collaboration, we've been able to get Teach the Teacher out to literally everyone in South Lanarkshire.
That's awesome. I'd love to hear how they went as well. So yeah, do keep me informed. And we've seen a little bit there, but I wonder the kind of impact that this has, not just on the students, but also on the teachers.
Sure. So in terms of the impact on the students, I mean, there's so many impacts I can get into. I think the main things that that we look at is seeing the positive impacts on the green skills. So educating young people on how they can be leaders in green jobs and so on, but also in advocacy skills, oracy skills, literacy skills. Students are able to build up their confidence, mitigating those feelings alone of climate anxiety, as they were able to make an impact in their school. I think that's the main and important bit, and be confident in doing that. A lot of the students who come on the program might sometimes be a bit shy or a bit nervous, and what we see by the end of it is that they're really confident and they build these leadership skills which will hopefully stay with them through life. And through that, they also learn about climate change, and they support that climate justice and climate education within their school and be part of that change. But also, like you mentioned, what is the impact on teachers? Well, we see that teachers firstly learn more about climate change and its importance and relevance to it being taught in school. I think that's what's really, really important for us, that by working with their students and allowing their students to take lead, they can understand the importance of why we do need to have climate education, why we need to know about climate change, but also learn about how they can implement it easily into lessons. I think that can be a very overwhelming concept alone for a teacher, especially like we said earlier, there's so much pressure in the schooling system. How do you, if you're, I don't know, a maths teacher, how do you get that into your lesson? And actually, we have a really great story of a maths teacher who didn't think it would be possible to get climate change into their lesson. And it was only when their students said, actually, no, what about if we use rainfall data next time we're doing a lesson on statistics? What if we learn more about how much greenhouse gases have been emitted in the last month or something like that? And just those little things, even whether it's just putting that into questions like homework questions or so on, it really empowers teachers to talk about climate change confidently, and gets that climate education going within those schools so that everyone, no matter what subject they're interested in, can benefit from that, but also no matter what subject the teacher teaches, can benefit from that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That is, one of the things that I work hardest on. And it's funny when maths teachers say, oh, we can't do it in maths. It's like, do you know how many numbers and statistics there are involved in the climate crisis? It's probably the easiest out of all of the subjects to get it into. When the PE teachers are even doing it, it's like, there you go. Good job. I think this is the perfect moment. We've talked a lot about TTT, Teach the Teacher. I think it's a great moment to have a little look at a wonderful video. So take it away, Mr. Rogers.
95% of young people aged 4 to 18 are worried about the planet's future due to climate change. Climate change will affect us all, but we can also be part of the solution. Young people often struggle to see how they fit into climate action, and that's where Teach the Teacher comes in. Teach the Teacher is a campaign by students organising for Sustainability UK, which champions climate education being integrated across all school subjects, so students can see how they can act on climate change. We provide free training and resources for students to deliver a 1-hour climate workshop for their teachers. The workshop covers climate basics, climate justice, climate anxiety, climate education, understanding the importance of climate education for all and how to integrate it into every subject. Taking part in Teach the Teacher is easy, with only 5 steps to follow. Step 1. Sign up on our website and a team member will contact you. Step 2. We'll onboard your students and build their confidence in discussing climate change. Step 3. We'll provide all the resources and you can rehearse and set a date. Step 4. Deliver the workshop. Step 5. Teachers can pledge to include climate topics in their lessons and access our resource library. Participating helps students gain green skills and become change makers in their schools. For more information or to sign up, visit greenschoolsrevolution.org or email hello@teachtheteacher.uk.
Welcome back, everyone. And before we say anything more, a big thank you to everybody who's watched so far. We've hit 1,000 viewers, so across all our various streaming platforms. So welcome to you, and thank you very much for watching, whether it's been 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or the whole thing so far. If you have any comments, by the way, tweet them at us, send them in, comment on YouTube. We'll throw them up on the screen. If you've got any questions for Sachin later on, then we can do that. I also, Sachin, have been thinking during the little break about a question I had again, one of my devil's advocate questions for you and Harry. And Harry, you can jump in on this if you want as well. Is, I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way. I think it's been really, really interesting so far. The bit about Greta, right? There'll be people out there who'll say that climate change and the issue of climate is if you like, a cross-political issue. It's an issue that goes across the political spectrum. There are people on the right, there are people on the left who all agree on the issue of climate, and actually across the political spectrum would support, climate protests and would support climate specific things. Do you think, and here's a difficult question for you, because we've mentioned intersectionality, we've mentioned when issues would maybe go into things like immigration or into refugee status or into, war protests or whatever, right? Whatever. Is it a mistake for Greta and for others like Greta to widen the issues into what I guess one part of the politics would say, now we're saying that climate is becoming an issue of the left rather than an issue that's cross-political, because activists are then getting involved in other protests that are political. Does that make sense? Is it a mistake for her and for other young people to do that, or do you think that's just the natural process of the way it's gone, and and people just do what they should do, what they want to do, and whatever the consequences of that are the consequences, and that's the end of that? Or do you think there's some sort of strategic thing here that is, well, I wouldn't say a mistake, but that's what they would say?
Great question. I think
I know I'm amazing at these.
Really good. It's like it's your job.
I think it ultimately comes back to how you view like climate justice and climate organizing. And I suppose it, as I said earlier, at least in my opinion, it's not something which exists in a vacuum and is impacted by those other things. So I certainly wouldn't agree with anyone who said it would be a mistake to like protest for other related causes, especially when, like we were saying, about how it's got its relevance to migration patterns, to refugee rights, to the status of, status of women around the world, and so on. It's got so many different intersectionalities and different parallels within it. And I think I would completely agree that, everyone must unite to fight against climate change. And that's an effective means of organizing through cross-political means, because then it allows for everyone on all different sides, the right or the left or the center or whoever, to get involved. But what I also would say is that there are links to other things which are incredibly relevant and important and have an impact, whether that's them impacting climate change, but more commonly when climate change impacts those other things like we spoke about. So I would disagree that it's necessarily a mistake for anyone to then protest for other things. But also, everyone has individual agency and the right to choose of what causes they care about and what intersectionalities they care about. I mean, I can't decide for anyone else. I can certainly encourage people to care about certain causes, and I definitely do that in my personal life. But also, I think it goes back to the idea that ultimately people have agency to protest, and if people care about something so much, whether that has a link to climate justice or not, I say to them, good for you, go and protest it.
And I think there will always be people who have the opposite agenda that are going to, no matter what is happening, no matter who's protesting what, they have the agenda against that protester. So they would always vilify that protester and paint that protester off as being, a nasty communist or something like that.
And again, this is my non-expert reading from a distance here. Do you think, though, that, if you went back, 3, 4, 5 years, that the view of Greta Thunberg, as an example, just because she's the figurehead of the movement, if you like, it's almost, things have maybe got a bit more polarized towards her, whereas at the beginning, I feel as though they weren't as much. I feel as though, I don't know, but that's my reading of it from the outside looking in. And perhaps that's because of social media and because you see more voices now than you did when she first started. So
I think also another great thing is she has helped create other voices within the movement that maybe aren't quite as, very much in inverted commas here, radical, because I don't believe she's radical. But other voices have come from that have come out that are not seen by perhaps people opposing these views. For me, it's blossomed some wonderful things. I mean, I'm sure it's helped Sachin as well. Not come out of his shell. I'm not saying you were ever in a shell, but I'm sure it's helped you and pushed you on from that.
I think that's where it pushes people onto other social justice issues altogether. Like when you can see those links be drawn together between, I'll use the example again of racial justice and its link with climate justice, about how, like if we can go as far back as colonial history and whatever, and how that has like been a systematic process of racism and so on. It really like allows people to get a more of a perspective on different things and form their own viewpoint and form their own and educate themselves on these different issues. And I think that's also what you can call it polarizing, but I would also argue that could just be that people are becoming more educated on different issues and like forming an opinion. I mean, that's the whole thing of youth activism and why engaging young people is so important.
I think speaking of this education and looking at the current climate education landscape, now the Department of Education's 2022 sustainability strategy was seen as like a pivotal moment for climate education. According to SOS UK, 72% of secondary level geography teachers covered positive impacts of climate change. I even saw them on BBC Bite-Sized in the GCSE review area. Some of the positive things that can happen because of climate change, different crops that can be grown in the UK and, booming tourism in the UK and people in the UK also experiencing 40 degrees, which, you might be able to see. I'm here in short sleeves. It is the 11th of November, but it is still incredibly hot here in Seville. there aren't that many benefits, I'd say. In fact, there are zero benefits. Absolutely 100%. And I would hope that geography teachers were teaching that there were no benefits whatsoever to climate change and the climate crisis. So from my perspective as a teacher, I see that things are slowly changing. Things are mildly improving, particularly within English language education. From your perspective, how effective do you think climate education is in schools right now? For me, it was one of the reasons. It's the lack of climate education is one of my big reasons for starting Renewable English and going that way. But what do you think? How effective is it at the moment?
No, exactly. I think, to put it quite brazenly, the reason why I work in this sector now is because I believe that climate education is still ineffective. And that's also exactly the reason why our campaign exists. And I think what I find really important, and particularly what resonates to me from around 4 years ago when I was doing my GCSEs, that unless you have a passion for science or geography, which back in school was not something I was ever interested in, I think particularly learning those very, very different subjects, lots of different information at once. I found it difficult as a young person being 15, 16 to actually be passionate about these things. It's difficult to receive the same level of climate education as others. And, there's so many methods and ways that it can be brought into the classroom across all subjects. But it sometimes feels like maybe it's more of a choice by political leaders not to improve for everyone, which is why I would call on Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, and Bridget Phillipson, our Education Secretary, to look at a really amazing document from Teach the Future, which is our sister campaign. So they campaign for better climate education and better sustainability within schools. And they produced a document called the Curriculum Track Changes, which just was an amazing document which offers essentially a young person's perspective on how they want to see the curriculum work for them and for climate education. And it demonstrates the importance of climate justice and action on the climate, but also in relation to the curriculum and to how this then has a quite tangible impact on climate education in schools. And what I also say is that in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, they all have different curriculums. I am in England, so I used to follow the English curriculum when I was back in high school many years ago. And they all of those, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, have different links to climate within them. And it certainly makes it easier to talk about, but within England, it can be particularly difficult as it's so restricted and constrained to science, geography, and maybe citizenship, which is why I'd really emphasize the importance on changing that and making it so that it's there for everyone, regardless of the subject you're in. And like we've already shown, it's incredibly easy to work in to the curriculum and to lessons.
It's so easy. It really is. My nieces actually live in Wales, and they say that it's not that they say that I'd be quite happy with it because I speak to my nieces quite a lot about it. So look at you mentioned earlier eco-anxiety. Now I like to look a bit beyond eco-anxiety and at big climate emotions. Because it is eco-anxiety is of course a big one, but there are so many others. We have guilt that's involved. But we have fear, we have anger, we have so many different things, frustration, so many different feelings that are involved. Now, I'm going to ask you in a minute about what the current education system is doing to combat this growing eco-anxiety, but I want to add in another question and ask you just a straight up question. Which do you think is worse, eco-anxiety or apathy?
That's a very good question. I think I wouldn't necessarily put them against each other because I think they're quite different ideas. But I think within schools, at least at the moment, just purely from seeing it firsthand, eco-anxiety is particularly prominent. And, you can be apathetic to a cause. And sure, I would equally argue that particularly within climate justice is problematic because we need to be very aware of it and informed so that we can take action on it. But also dealing, we're living in an age where mental health problems are really bad and there's very little support for it. And so I would also argue that eco-anxiety, climate worry, there's many different names for it, but ultimately it's a very significant problem which affects a lot of young people, and it's why we have to teach it as well so that people can know about how they can mitigate those feelings.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
I dealt you a bit of a curveball there. I apologise. It's one of the huge things I talk about within my classes. I use the climate emotions wheel all the time with my students. In fact, every training presentation starts with that. Do you think the education system is doing, I'm going to say enough, but I'm most actually going to say anything to combat these growing cases of eco-anxiety?
Yeah, I think mental health provisions alone in the education system, particularly in this case looking at compulsory education, is not combating the growing and new forms of anxieties. So particularly looking at eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, and it is something which needs to be tackled because schools alone really struggle to deal with mental health problems effectively, so that students can be supported in the most effective manner. But also, with this new form of anxiety, which is very unique to young people, because we're living in an age of reality where we're seeing every day in the media these negative news stories. We're seeing that we're on track to hit 2 degrees and so on, and schools are not equipped because they're not given the right resources to deal with that. And I think it also goes into those wider things around the education system as a whole and how that needs to be structured around supporting students, and also giving teachers methods of cope as well, so that they are able to effectively deal with those situations as and when they come up. But I think as well, that alone is not enough. And there's some really great campaigns about having a counsellor in every school, because professional help ultimately is where a lot of young people need, and almost that middle tier where it's more than what a teacher can support, but not so much where it has to be escalated beyond the school environment. And I think it's important to recognize that, climate change is real and it's happening, but schools need to show how people can make a positive impact on their local, whether that's a local community or organizing for climate justice, but also how even things like how you can personally cope with it and how you can personally understand it on your own journey is something which schools need to be able to be better equipped to support people. And I think as well, like giving students skills and knowledge to know how to deal with those emotions is ultimately the most important way to do that, because a lot of people will struggle to process those emotions. It's only by having the knowledge and the understanding of this is how I can deal with this effectively and see a positive future where schools can be most effective.
One of the things I always talk to teachers about. Oh, sorry, Tom.
It's all right. We've had a comment. Pat, who's been watching us, so thank you, Pat. He's 52. Climate change was on his mind age 16. I have to be honest, it wasn't for me. I'm 39, and it wasn't when I was in school. It just wasn't. It started maybe in my 20s to start getting into my head a bit more. Maybe late 20s. So maybe the last 10 years, I would say.
One of the big things for me was in 1991. There was a cyclone in Bangladesh, and a lot of students were rehomed to Northampton, where I'm from. I didn't know so much about climate change. I'd heard of global warming, but I'd suddenly seen the impact of an environmental disaster, and I saw that. And so I was only 7 at the time. I'm 40, by the way, if we're sharing our ages. And I saw the impact at the time, and that for me was one of those big moments when I kind of stopped and looked at it and thought, it's not really fair that these people have had to move so far away from their home because of flooding and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I was thinking before about eco-anxiety and so on. And one of the things I always say to teachers that I work with is make sure your classroom is a safe space. Make sure that your students can come and speak to you, and also be vulnerable. Like, as I say, I'm 40. I believe that I'm also going to have to deal, hopefully in my lifetime, that I will be, not hopefully I'll see these things with climate change, but hopefully I'll live long enough to see us get through it. But I know that it is going to affect my life. I know it is going to affect my daughter's life. So I have these not particularly positive feelings. So opening up and being vulnerable about that with my students helps them come to me if they have an issue that maybe they can't speak to their parents about, maybe they can't speak to someone else about. So being open and having your classroom as a safe space is really important. I'm wondering, so in the whole provision of climate education, what role does teach the teacher have in plugging those gaps? In what can it do to help fix it?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's that main thing about teacher demonstrating essentially just how easy it is to implement climate education to any subject. And of course, that's only 1/4 of it. And even within climate anxiety, it's about teaching those people to look at positive news stories, or to remember that there's action they can take to be part of that change and so on. But not only do we give, let's say, intuitive ideas around climate education with different subjects, I think what teacher really offers as well for teachers is that when they make their climate education pledge, they will receive a link to our resource library. And this is such an expansive resource library, which has so many different things across all different subjects, everything from videos, lesson plans, and just generally resources which can be distributed in the classroom. And I think it's that bridging of the gap between the current provision which we see and what we'd like to see in the future, and how those can also align within the curriculum and so on. And I think going back to mental health, we're bridging the gap with positive news stories. I think it's really important sharing those positive news stories, seeing how there's positive impacts, or there's people doing positive work already and taking action that making students feel less isolated. So looking at best practice that's already happening in schools, giving students the opportunity to see good climate education in lessons and share their opinions with their teachers. And through that, looking at positive news stories, looking at different action they can take within their schools, it all creates this more whole education approach where we include climate education as a really important issue. And we don't want people to think that climate education is completely failing, because it's not, and there's so many people doing amazing things, but there's always more we can do. And I think it's also great, there's also great work which is already happening, and we should celebrate that too.
Now,
go on, Harry, go on. No, the government has launched a curriculum and assessment review. Now, I'm not going to push you on this one, because obviously you're not a teacher, as it were, and you're not deeply involved in that. But I was wondering, what changes you'd like to see. If you had a magic wand and you could fix the government and all the good things the government could do, what changes would you like to see how the climate emergency is taught? And could this help fill those gaps that are currently being plugged by Teach the Teacher?
I think the simple answer to that would be integrate climate into all subjects. Everyone needs to understand how they fit into the future of the climate, and see a future where we deal with climate change effectively. So making sure climate is framed around solutions rather than problems. And as well, like we were saying, talking about the positive impacts of climate justice, and how taking action can be effective. And I think as well, like, we want to see more of students being a part of the changing how we see climate change. I think that's one of the really important things of changing that narrative and making it more collaborative with everyone. I think most people across the environmental education space are already championing this integrated approach. But I think as well, it's also about reframing everything so that climate education is a solutions focused. Sorry, I'm reading too many words at once. It's a solutions focused approach, not testing students on like the positives or making it about test or quiz or whatever, but about creating a narrative which is effective for young people. Because as well, the curriculum assessment review, it does also have a narrative on preparing young people for life and future in work. So why don't we mention green skills in that? Why don't we mention how every job can be a green job in that, and so on?
I love that. Every job can be a green job, and it really should be. It really should be. That's one of the big things that I like to speak about as well. And you've talked about the future, however you want to see it. If you want to see it as dystopian, utopian, or just regular opium, you choose your opium there. So the UK's target of achieving net zero by 2050. We're going to hear that a lot, it's the kind of things we hear. We like to set targets a long way into the future so we can then shift the goalposts as we get closer. And the growing demand for a green workforce. How can climate education prepare people for future jobs? And how can future jobs integrate these green skills?
Sure. So I think firstly, like looking at climate education alone, climate education, I think when you hear it, you sometimes think, oh, we're learning about loads of facts and statistics and so on. But it's also about those practical things about what we can do to help the environment. So like I said just now, any job can be a green job, and most jobs are green jobs or can be created into being green jobs. I think a lot of people think that a green job might be like my job, for example, as a campaign coordinator at a climate charity, or maybe working for a green energy firm. But I think effective climate education can actually prepare you for any job in the future, as all jobs will eventually become green jobs. I think one example I really like to use when people ask me about this is about how, for example, with climate education, say you're learning about where food comes from. Say in the future, you're like, I want to be a chef. How are you going to source your food? Will it be locally? Will it be imports or so on? And could you use plant-based alternatives, exactly, to meats which use less energy to produce, process, and ship. So like, it's even those little things where climate education can prepare you for that and give you a new understanding of how you see jobs in the future. And as well, I think that just brings on to the idea that climate education helps everyone be a part of the future of the green jobs workforce. It doesn't just help people who, like me, already work in the sector or want to work in the sector, but it prepares young people to bring those green skills into any different job which they may work in the future and benefit their workplace and their employment.
I love that. It's not necessarily about having green jobs. It's about greening jobs that already exist. I mean, one thing so my brother's a chef. He lives in Australia. He's also plant-based like myself. And he was working in a huge RSA, they're called. It was basically a big club. And he was the executive chef there. And one of the very, very small things he did was, any meal that had meat in it would be served it would be mentioned that it was served without meat, and if people wanted to add the meat, they could, rather than the other way around, where it usually is, oh, can I have that but without the chicken? It was, it's a Caesar salad. It doesn't come with the chicken. Would you like chicken? Yes. So rather than having it the other way around, and it's just those simple, small things that make it greener, that make it a greener job. I love that example of a chef. Really, really nice. So how do you see schools contributing to this effort, particularly through the wonderful TTT, Teach the Teacher?
Sure. I think Teach the Teacher ultimately is a brilliant opportunity for students to build up their knowledge of climate change. And I think mainly just to further those green skills and to also, I suppose, create a base level where everyone participated in Teacher. Everyone's got a base level of knowledge on climate basics, climate justice, anxiety, and also climate education. So it would really improve the workforce as a whole. And also, I think it helps people understand that everyone can be a change maker, whether that's a small scale thing in your school or being the next Greta, who knows. It provides like everyone with a platform to learn more about climate education. And I think particularly when looking at the impact on teachers and, like essentially taking up teachers' time, it's that importance that this is something students care about. And it's something we really want to work with you and not against you on. And that's why it's so genuine and such an important, has so much importance. And we do hope that schools will sign up and get involved with Teacher, because as well, it builds on current climate education. This is why we like it being so flexible and so on, that particularly if there's teachers who already have an idea about what they want to teach or so on, it gives them the opportunity as well to get involved. And I think one thing I always think about is that students need to receive an education for climate justice and climate change. It's not just about learning about it, but learning for it. So how we can then apply that in the real world. And that's where it's really important about gaining that knowledge and those skills. Because, you can learn about statistics and so on for days. I don't choose to do that because I don't think it necessarily helps. It's about learning what we can do and what how those statistics or whatever actually have a tangible impact. So I think Teacher is just that chance for schools to reflect on how they engage with climate change in their schools and make clearer connections in their taught content, but also to make sure students are gaining the skills to make sure they feel like they're supported for the future.
That's a wonderful point. And yeah, going back very briefly to this idea of greener jobs and for the future, because people who are in school now will be doing all of the jobs, as we get older. They'll be doing every single job. And it goes down to there's a supermarket in my village where, I sometimes go and do my shopping. And in there, they would always say, as I went up there, would you like a bag? Would you like a bag? And I'd say, no, I'm good for a bag. I'm good for a bag. But then what I said, I stopped and I spoke to them. I said, rather than asking people if they want a bag, wait till they ask you for a bag, or say to them, do you want to buy a bag? Because that suddenly changes everything, and they stop and think. So like you say, if we can learn this from a young age, we'll be entering the workforce of every single job, thinking of it in that way of what can I do to be greener? What can I do to make a difference, right here where I am?
No, exactly. I completely agree.
That's epic. We've actually reached 1,500 viewers now. So since the last time we spoke. So welcome and thank you everybody for clicking and saying and checking in with what we're talking about here, which is obviously quite an important topic. Coming to the end of the conversation, it'd be great. I think just from my perspective, if you haven't checked it out, then definitely, if you're a teacher, if you're a school leader, if you're anybody concerned with climate, whatever subject you teach, then get over to sos-uk.org, visit the Teach the Teacher campaign page, have a look at how you can invite them in and get involved with the project. I'm sure anyone who's listened to this in any capacity this evening or watched some of it will have an interest in what they're doing. From my perspective, I think it's very, very important and inspiring work. And I think it's something that we can all sort of get involved in a little bit more. I mean, obviously teachers are under time pressure, but this is something that is, well, number one, it's really important. And number two, the way it's structured, I think is very, very helpful actually to teachers. I think it takes a little bit of pressure off them. And I think the idea of students doing some of the teaching, some of the presenting is actually really interesting and positive. And I think a lot of teachers would enjoy that element, seeing the students come out of their shells and giving them that opportunity and that platform. So from my perspective, and I'm sure from everyone at Teachers Talk Radio's perspective, this is a really, really interesting thing to check out. Harry, anything you want to add just as your final little thought on it all? And then I'll say the same thing. Final little thing
I'm just absolutely delighted that this exists, because I believe within the climate movement there needs to be support in every single area. This is very much like the area that I work in with youth empowerment and helping students speak up for what they believe in and asking for what they want when it comes to their teachers and their education. So for me, I'm absolutely blown away by this whole initiative, and super impressed with our wonderful guest here today. I'm obviously impressed with this guy too, but super impressed with everything you've had to say, and I can't wait to learn even more. In fact, well, it's nearly my bedtime, but when I wake up tomorrow, I'll be doing a big deep dive into this one even more so. So I really can't wait.
Epic. Listen, Sachin, it's been an absolute pleasure and a blast to have you on. You've spoken incredibly well about lots and lots of things tonight. So thank you ever so much for giving up your time. I wondered whether you had a final message to listeners or viewers, a final thing, final thought.
Got to be sign up to Teacher.
It's a pretty decent final thought.
That's an easy one there.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've mentioned, you can get over there to the website. I'm putting it on screen one more time now. Get over there, sos-uk.org. Visit the Teach the Teacher campaign page, and yeah, sign up. It's pretty simple, really. Get involved in the project. From us at Teachers Talk Radio, we want to thank you for tuning in. Nearly 2,000 people have watched this stream. So thank you, whether it's been X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever it is that you have been watching or listening. Thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. We'll be back again with more shows the rest of this week. So definitely keep following us, subscribe to the podcast. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is you get them. We'll be back. We've got more stuff on climate coming too. And we can't wait to share this show with you as a podcast. So look out for it on all those podcast platforms. Thank you, SOS UK. Thank you, Teach the Teacher. We will be back soon. Good night, everybody.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.